When I found out about his infidelity, it felt like my entire world crumbled. The man I had built my life with, the father of our child, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I'd given him everything: my trust, my loyalty, and years of my life. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. His expression was a mixture of guilt and annoyance, as though my heartbreak was nothing more than an inconvenience in his life. The divorce was inevitable after that. It was a bitter and painful process, but there was no point dragging out something that was already dead. Our home, which once felt so full of life, turned cold and empty. He took his things and left, moving in with the woman he'd cheated on me with. Most nights I could still hear the echoes of our old arguments, the tense silence that filled the air when we tried to pretend that everything was normal. The one bright spot in all of this was my son, Alex. At 17, he was no longer a child, but not quite an adult either. I could see how hard he was trying to be strong for me, the way he offered a comforting hug when the tears started falling. It wasn't just the pain of the divorce that haunted me, but the guilt of dragging him into this broken mess. I could see the way it weighed on him, the way he'd look at me with a mix of concern and helplessness, like he didn't know how to fix this. Despite everything, he chose to stay with me. My husband, my ex-husband now, had taken the easy way out, leaving without looking back, but Alex was my rock. He became my only source of support, the only person who seemed to care about the pieces of my shattered heart. The first few weeks after the divorce were a blur of sadness and exhaustion. I couldn't eat, I could barely sleep, and every morning felt like I was waking up to the same nightmare. Alex would make me breakfast, force me to eat even when I had no appetite. He'd sit beside me on the couch, holding my hand as if that simple gesture could keep me from falling apart. And maybe it did, because his presence was the only thing that kept me grounded. One evening, as we sat together watching TV, I felt a sense of calm wash over me that I hadn't felt in months. The warmth of his hand in mine was soothing, like an anchor pulling me back to the surface. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how much he'd grown. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was almost a man, and the thought filled me with a strange, bittersweet pride. "You don't have to stay here and take care of me, you know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You have your own life to live." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a tenderness that caught me off guard. "I want to stay," he said simply. "You're my mom, and I'm not going to leave you alone." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to my eyes. I tried to hold them back, but they spilled over anyway. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close, and I buried my face in his chest, letting myself cry for the first time since the divorce. I cried for everything I'd lost, for the life I'd imagined we would have, and for the betrayal that had shattered it all. When I finally pulled back, I was embarrassed by how vulnerable I felt. I wiped my eyes, giving him a weak smile. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I shouldn't put all of this on you." He shook his head, brushing a stray tear from my cheek. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "We're in this together." Something in the way he said it made my heart swell with emotion. I leaned in and kissed his forehead, the way I used to when he was little. For a moment, it felt like everything was going to be all right, like maybe we could rebuild something out of the ashes of our broken family. As the weeks turned into months, we fell into a new routine. It was just the two of us now, and while it was lonely, it was also peaceful. We'd have dinner together every night, talking about our day, and I found myself opening up to him more than I ever had before. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was my confidant, the one person I could be honest with. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with a serious look in his eyes. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm trying to be." He nodded, his hand finding mine. "You deserve to be happy," he said quietly. "You deserve someone who loves you." I looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. There was something different in the way he was looking at me, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the look of a son comforting his mother. It was deeper, more complex. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, something I knew I shouldn't feel. I pulled my hand away, forcing a smile. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You're a good son." But as I stood up to go inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something we couldn't take back. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the moment over and over in my head. It was nothing, I told myself. He was just being sweet, just trying to make me feel better. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was a tension between us now, an unspoken something that neither of us knew how to deal with. The next morning, I avoided his gaze as we sat down for breakfast. I couldn't look at him without feeling a rush of confusing emotions, a mixture of love, fear, and something else I didn't want to acknowledge. He seemed to sense it too, the way he glanced at me, hesitant and uncertain. I knew we couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. I just didn't know how to face it, how to admit that my son had become my everything, and that maybe, in a way I wasn't ready to accept, I had become his everything too. The awkward silence between us stretched on as we finished our breakfast. It was unlike any silence we'd had before, not the comforting quiet of two people who knew each other deeply, but a tension-filled pause that seemed to vibrate in the air. I forced myself to focus on the mundane task of clearing the table, but my hands shook as I gathered the plates. I could feel his eyes on me, watching me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "Mom, wait," Alex said softly, his voice pulling me back from my spiraling thoughts. I turned to face him, clutching the plates as if they were a lifeline. He stood up from the table, crossing the room to stand in front of me, too close. My breath caught in my throat. I could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with the faintest hint of the soap he always used. He reached out, gently taking the plates from my hands and setting them on the counter. His fingers brushed mine, and the touch felt electric, sparking something deep inside me that I didn't want to acknowledge. I took a step back, needing space, but he followed, his gaze locked on mine. "Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with a raw vulnerability I'd never heard from him before. "Please don't pull away from me." "I'm not," I lied, my voice trembling. I couldn't meet his eyes, afraid of what I might see there, afraid of what he might see in mine. "You are," he insisted, reaching out to gently lift my chin, forcing me to look at him. "Ever since that night on the porch, you've been distant. It feels like you're avoiding me." "I'm not avoiding you," I said, the words weak and unconvincing even to my own ears. I've been overwhelmed. It's been a lot to process." He nodded, his eyes softening with an understanding that made my heart ache. "I get that," he said quietly. "But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you. I want to be here for you." His words were like a balm to my wounded soul, but they also filled me with a confusing mixture of guilt and longing. I wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into the comfort he was offering, but the way he looked at me, there was something in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the concern of a son for his mother. It was something deeper, something more intense. "Alex," I began, but my voice broke. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You've been incredible, and I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months. But I need you to know that there are boundaries, lines that we can't cross." His expression faltered, pain flashing in his eyes before he quickly masked it. He dropped his hand from my face, taking a step back. "I know," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know there are lines, but sometimes it feels like those lines are just there to keep us from being honest about how we really feel." I stared at him, stunned into silence. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. He was saying out loud what I'd been too afraid to even think. The air between us felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and forbidden desires that neither of us knew how to articulate. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to him. I wrapped my arms around my body, as if I could physically hold myself together against the storm of emotions raging inside me. "Maybe it isn't," Alex admitted, stepping closer again. His voice was low, a plea. "But it's real. I can't pretend anymore, and I don't think you can either. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I shook my head, taking another step back until I was pressed against the kitchen counter. You don't know what you're saying, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You're confused, Alex. This is all just because of everything that's happened. The divorce, the stress. You're looking for comfort, and I'm the only one here. He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Oh, Mom, it's not just that. It's not confusion. I've tried to push these feelings away, tried to ignore them, but they keep coming back. And I know you feel something too. I see it in the way you look at me. My resolve crumbled under the weight of his words. The truth was, he was right. I had felt it too, that pull, that connection that was more than just maternal affection. I'd buried it deep, refusing to acknowledge it, but now that he'd voiced it, there was no going back. I'm your mother, I said, the words barely more than a whisper. Whatever this is, it can't happen. It's wrong. He closed the distance between us in 2 quick strides, his hands gently gripping my arms as he looked down at me, his expression pleading. Maybe it's wrong, he said, his voice raw with emotion, but it's also the most real thing I've ever felt. And I don't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me, I insisted, even though my own voice shook with uncertainty. But it has to stop. We can't go down this road. His grip on my arms tightened slightly, as if he were afraid I might slip away. Tell me you don't feel it too, he challenged, his eyes searching mine. Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't feel the same way. I opened my mouth to say the words, to deny everything and put an end to this madness, but the lie wouldn't come. Couldn't do it. The truth was there, raw and undeniable, shimmering between us like a fragile thread, and I didn't have the strength to sever it. I can't, I admitted, my voice breaking. But that doesn't make it right. For a long moment we just stood there, staring at each other. The silence was deafening, filled with all the things we couldn't say. Then slowly he leaned down, his face inches from mine, giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't. When his lips met mine, it was like a dam breaking. All the tension, all the fear, all the unspoken emotions that had been building up for months crashed over us in a tidal wave of need and longing. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair as I gave in to the moment, letting myself feel everything I'd tried so hard to deny. We broke apart, both of us breathing hard, our foreheads resting together. What are we doing? I whispered, the enormity of it all crashing down on me. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely audible. But I don't want to stop. Neither did I. And that was the most terrifying realization of all. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away. There was only the feeling of his breath mingling with mine, the heat of his body pressed against me, and the pounding of my heart, which felt like it was echoing through my entire being. I knew I should pull away, push him back, say something to break this spell we had fallen under, but I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in this moment of raw vulnerability and need that neither of us seemed capable of escaping. Mom, he whispered, the words sounding both familiar and foreign on his lips, filled with a longing that I knew wasn't supposed to be there. It jolted me back to reality, a cold rush of clarity cutting through the haze of desire. I stepped back, forcing a barrier between us, even though every fiber of my being screamed against it. I couldn't look at him, couldn't face the expression I knew I'd see on his face. My hands were trembling as I brought them up to cover my mouth, as if I could erase what had just happened by sheer willpower alone. We can't do this, I choked out, my voice sounding strangled, like it was being pulled from the depths of my soul. This isn't right. It's not okay. Alex's face crumpled with a mixture of hurt and frustration. He took a step closer, reaching out as if to comfort me, but I flinched away, the gesture cutting deeper than any words could have. Please don't, I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. I need time to think. I need to process this. He stood there, looking lost and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. It broke my heart to see him like that, but I couldn't let myself be swayed by the look in his eyes, no matter how much I wanted to. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible, as though he were afraid to say the words out loud. I didn't mean to push you. I've never felt anything like this before, and I don't know how to handle it. Neither do I admitted, my voice shaking with the weight of the truth. But we can't let this go any further. It has to stop now, before we do something we can't take back. He nodded slowly, but the anguish in his eyes made it clear that he wasn't convinced. He looked like a lost little boy, and it made my heart ache to see him like that, but I knew I had to be strong. For both of us. I'll give you space, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. But please don't shut me out completely. I can't stand the thought of losing you, even if it's just as my mom. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back, giving him a small, broken smile. You're not going to lose me, I promised, though I wasn't sure if it was a promise I could keep. I just need time. With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me at any moment. I made it upstairs to my bedroom, closing the door behind me before collapsing onto the bed. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, and I buried my face in the pillow, sobbing quietly into the fabric. I didn't know how long I lay there, but it felt like hours. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and guilt, the taste of his kiss still lingering on my lips like a forbidden secret I could never confess. I hated myself for wanting it, for feeling the things I did. I was his mother, and this was a line we couldn't cross, no matter what my heart might be telling me. Eventually, the tears dried up, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the ceiling as if it might hold the answers I was so desperately searching for. How had it come to this? How had we let things get so out of control? I thought back to the months after the divorce, the way we had clung to each other in the aftermath, seeking comfort and solace in a world that felt cold and unforgiving. We had become everything to each other because we had no one else. It had been innocent at first, a shared need for support and love, but somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred. The closeness we had shared had turned into something else, something neither of us knew how to handle. A soft knock on my bedroom door pulled me out of my thoughts. I sat up quickly, wiping at my eyes as if I could erase all evidence of my tears. Mom, are you okay? Alex's voice was soft, hesitant, as though he wasn't sure if he should even be speaking to me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm fine, I said, though my voice sounded anything but fine. I just need a little time alone. There was a long pause, and I could almost feel his anxiety through the closed door. I understand, he said finally. I'll be downstairs if you need me. Okay, I whispered, though I knew I wouldn't be calling for him any time soon. I listened to the sound of his footsteps retreating down the hallway, and a fresh wave of guilt washed over me. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my room, trying to sort through the mess of emotions that had been unleashed. I replayed the kiss in my mind over and over, hating myself for the way I'd responded to him, for the way I'd wanted it. I was supposed to be the adult, the one who set boundaries and protected him, but I had failed. When evening came, I finally forced myself out of bed. I couldn't avoid him forever. We lived under the same roof, and I owed it to him to at least try to talk this through. I made my way downstairs, finding him sitting on the couch with the TV on, though it didn't look like he was watching it. He glanced up when I walked in, his eyes searching mine for any sign of forgiveness or resolution. I sat down next to him, leaving a small but deliberate space between us. For a long moment we just looked at each other, neither of us knowing what to say. We can't pretend this didn't happen, I said finally, my voice low and shaky. But we have to find a way to move past it. We can't let this destroy everything. He nodded, swallowing hard. No, I don't know how to move past it. I don't know how to stop feeling the way I do. The raw honesty in his voice broke something inside me, but I forced myself to stay strong. You have to try, I said gently. For both of our sakes. We can't go down this road, Alex. Too dangerous. It would ruin us. I'll try, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. But I don't think it's going to be that easy. Neither did I.